Yeah.
Limor,
Here I
it's just
am.
like not being able to have an orgasm. Nothing was working today.
It's kind of similar to that, actually, the frustration.
So I think we're okay for now.
We're all here.
Oh, actually, Vanessa's letting us know it seems to be a New York area technical problem.
Oh, interesting.
Thank you, because this has never happened before. So it's so apropos that we're talking about not being able to have an orgasm. Oh, we see people can see us now. It's like not being able to come. So this happened to you for 30 years, Suzanne? Can we pick up this? How did you deal with it?
Very difficultly. Like I became an elected official. I used to call it the problem in my pocket, that nobody really knew about, but I stayed out of relationships and, I was in it. And it was just something I carried around, this feeling of inadequacy and this shame, and I mean, I couldn't really shake it. So anyway, going back to where we were before we got cut off was I had tried cannabis and it took me a few months. I was with a partner who had suggested it. This was back like in 2018. And it took me a few months to learn how to surrender. I think that was the big lesson for me. And I really had a hard time surrendering. Like that this is an altered state of consciousness. Orgasm is an altered state of consciousness. And I had not learned how to surrender. And it's interesting because I had written with somebody on Reddit. There's a thread on Reddit called Becoming Orgasmic with more than 30,000 members. And I remember her sharing about how she hates surrendering. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that is not going to work really well for trying to have an orgasm. Or not trying, but surrendering into the experience of orgasm because it requires no mind. No mind.
Well, can I jump in there and say it's not even it's no mind. Your mind needs to be on the sensations, on the experience.
Right. Exactly.
Because
not am I
people,
gonna orgasm.
Good luck
exactly
not having mind, but it's the mind channel that can tune into the sensations. So if your mind is, and this is what my research showed, it's the mind doesn't shut off like people think the mind has to shut off. No, the mind needs to be tuned to the body channel.
And that's how I connected with you, was through your research. When I learned about when I was doing my dissertation on women who had partnered sex and were using cannabis, I stumbled on Dr. Nan Wise's research and reached out to you because I was so inspired by your work and by your findings about the amygdala staying active, during orgasm, which, the amygdala, the part of the brain that actually stores trauma. So women who have sexual abuse histories, I don't have any recollection of sexual abuse, although therapists have told me I have all the signs. So, I had a grandfather living in our house who I found out when I was 30 was an alcoholic and hid bottles around the house. I was shocked to discover that, but I had all the signs of sexual abuse as a child, and they had moved him upstairs with my brother, and my one brother was like, well, God, I hope he didn't touch us. So anyway, the learning how to surrender and the altered state of consciousness, which was one of the theories that I had developed and it was published, I presented it at a conference, was altered state of consciousness theory. That as we learn, cannabis can teach us how to surrender into the altered state of consciousness, and orgasm is an altered state of consciousness. So kind of like from a mathematical perspective.
Yeah. Well, you know what marijuana does do? Cannabis it actually enhances sensations. So the way that I would look at the benefits of cannabis, it gets us more into sensations. And because it is a psychoactive drug, it's like it allows for crosstalk between different columns. And can I say something really quick about the amygdala? The amygdala gets a bad rap. The amygdala's function.
Yeah, it does.
The amygdala's function is actually to pay attention to basically very, very good or very bad experiences. Because what it does, it goes like this to the hippocampus, pay attention to this. So everybody thinks it's all about fear, but it's actually about strong valences, like really, really pleasurable experiences. It's actually part of the emotional learning. system. So the amygdala stays on because it's part of that whole limbic system circuitry that gets a lot of activation. So I think that, the active ingredients in cannabis that really, they alter consciousness by getting you more like the sensation channel turns up. So you can be in your, dare I say, pleasure body. And I'm going to put it out here. I'm going to say something radical. I know we're petitioning now for female orgasm disorder to be the condition that they approve medical marijuana to be prescribed for. But I'm going to tell you, there's even, not that that's not enough. I think cannabis in the right doses for the right people, because I couldn't use it when I used to have panic attacks. I couldn't use any marijuana. I flew out 2 ankles. But I think it's an aphrodisiac, and it really, really enhances not just the experience of orgasm, but we got some thumbs up from somebody, or is that from me? No, I don't think but it actually gives you more, for me and for many women that I've talked for over 40 years, more access to active sexual desire. We can get horny when you don't have to be so high that you're flying around the room. But and the tough part is figuring out for a lot of people the right dose.
Right. And the way.
And you were, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, because I don't have any experience with it, smoking it since I was in college either, but having taken it in other forms, it's hard for timing and for getting the right dose to get the right effect, because too much makes me nutty and tired. But I have found in my experience, yes, more desire, more interest, but also more focus and the ability to just get lost in what I'm feeling. So on my own personal experiment, that's kind of where it is for me. I find it much more pleasurable, and it can last longer, and all the noise, all the spectatoring, all the other just goes away.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of research also to back this up, that it increases desire, especially in women. And this is what I find interesting about all these research findings, is they all agree that especially for women, marijuana use is so vital for their sexual pleasure. And I wanted to ask you, Suzanne, because I know in the previous video you started to touch up on it, how you actually introduced it, and you talked about dosing. So maybe we can, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your introduction to it and exactly what you found was the right balance, because I know a lot of people are scared about becoming addicted. And actually there are some research findings that show that women are more susceptible to getting more dependent on the substance. So maybe you can talk to us about how you found a balance.
So first I'd like to comment, I will happily do that. And Nan had talked about women having more desire and being an aphrodisiac. And there are studies that show that the states that have medical marijuana programs people are having more sex. So that is confirmed through research. The dosing and how to find dosing, I can speak from my personal experience, as well as interviewing 40 women for my study, as well as the 387 women that replied. Actually, we had over 1,000 women reply to my research survey, and we used 387 surveys that were validated. And what women found was, what I can share through my personal experience as well, is practice, finding what works. And a book was written in 1953 by Becker, is his last name, How to Become a Marijuana User. And basically what they said in this book is that unless one learns how to recognize its pleasurable effects, they're not going to use it. So Dr. Nan, when you talked about, for example, having a panic attack using it, that was my experience too. My first time, in college, standing in the parking lot, want to have a hit of cannabis? I was like, yeah, sure. I go in a physics class and have a panic attack. Do I want to use cannabis again? No. So I think there are a number of people who have had experiences like that have trepidation about using it again. So it's the line is go low and go slow, meaning start with a very small dose. And that can be done through inhalation. My study found, although we didn't measure exactly, I asked the 40 women who I had interviewed with and without orgasm difficulty, 20 with and 20 without. They all used cannabis with THC that was effective. So, and it ranged from 15% to 20+%. And it's, I know in Florida you can buy like one joint and try it out. That's what the medical cannabis doctor had said to me. Try different, don't buy like a whole container. Try different strains. And we found that and I found personally too, and even women that I interviewed in where it was illegal, that it all worked with THC, the cannabis with THC. It was to different degrees, some to more degrees than others. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it because we don't have a pharmaceutical, we don't have a prescription yet. We don't have a pharmaceutical drug yet that says take this 30 minutes before you have sex.
One of the concerns is if they make this into big pharma, they're going to alter it. One of the nice things about cannabis is it contains so many different substances, terpenes, that seem to have a lot of, anti-cancer, anti-stroke, all sorts of benefits. Now, the drugs that are out there for this, they suck and they have a lot of side effects, and I've reviewed them. But I do want to say word of caution. The marijuana out there is a lot stronger than it was for those of you who remember back in the day. And, also one of the things, I've actually had a consult with Jordan Tischler, who is the medical marijuana guy that you've worked with, Suzanne, and did your research with. And I spoke to him about some of the side effects I get where I can feel like, a little motorically inhibited and whatever. And what he recommended, it makes a lot of sense. If you use one of those flower vapes, which is where you grind up the stuff, and instead of it being lighted and it's not like smoky, it's better for your lungs. If you take a tiny 1 or 2 little hits off of that, you'll get an immediate effect, and you can really calibrate the dosage so much more finely than if you light up a joint, because you get, and also the effects of the combustion. And if the eating the pot can really backfire because you don't know how much, how it's going to hit you. So very small amounts via something like a vape. There's something called the PAX, which is really good. There's something called the One, I think, that Jordan Tischler recommends. And this way you can calibrate the dose, and a little goes a long way. So we've had some people make comments on about, like, for one person, they said 1-to-1 TH to CBD works best. If it's just THC, they get too anxious. And the same person was making a comment about the amygdala. Isn't it bifurcated? We have 2 amygdalas on both sides of the brain, and they have different sections in the amygdala. So when it gets active in different sections, you're going to have different experiences. So I'm sorry, I'm just reacting to that question as well.
This is great.
But what about CBD?
Go slow, start low, and I would say you don't need to smoke a joint. You don't need the fire in your lungs. So you can take tiny little hits off of these flower vapes. Flower means the ground marijuana.
A hit and wait.
And it usually affects you pretty quickly. Right. So you can say, I think and if you notice that you're just like I see it moving from the pain body to the pleasure body. So the pain body, and by the way, Suzanne, you don't have to actually have had sexual abuse to show up with signs of that as a child. If you didn't feel safe.
That is correct.
If there was stuff going on in your home when you were growing up that you didn't feel safe, it's going to show up, and it may show up in the way of how do you release vigilance, hypervigilance, when you don't feel safe as a kid.
How do you surrender, right?
How do you surrender, right, Limor?
Yeah. And I wanted to ask about actually CBD, because I know this is actually something that a lot of people are taking now. And can this alone be used, like CBD oils, for example? Can this be used as well to enhance pleasure?
When you say oil, where would you're talking about?
No,
orally?
Orally, yeah.
I have haven't heard anybody talking about getting turned on by CBD. I may be wrong. Well, the other thing is if it relaxes people, they
Yeah.
may be
Yeah.
more in the body channel without having psychotropic effects. Because CBD does not have the it's not hallucinatory, but the psychotropic effects that cannabis does. So whatever, but I really feel like, and there's a lot of really good research. For example, I believe it's in Israel that they use cannabis for people and senior citizens
Yes.
to increase they get more active. They
Yes.
seem to have better appetites. Well, we know that. I actually get munchies, but if I have sex, that's enough. I don't need to eat anything. Little
You
oral
feel
sex
saturated.
can be fun as a munchie kind of thing to do. Is that too graphic?
No, the munchies are the worst.
No. I haven't seen any research on CBD oil, on CBD alone being effective in helping women with orgasm issues. At least my study didn't
No,
show
I
show
haven't
that.
seen any either.
Now, is it true, Suzanne, that you don't need marijuana to have an orgasm?
That's true.
Oh, let's talk about
I
that.
had one this morning. I just thought it was time. I don't know why. I talked to my friend and we had a meeting at 1:00. I was like, I don't know why. It was like a queen morning. But
you needed
yes.
your glow for this live.
Sometimes, excuse me, they say that the hairdresser or the house cleaner doesn't have the cleanest house, or the hairdresser doesn't have the stylish. And I'm thinking, as an orgasm researcher, people might think, oh, she orgasms all the time. And it's like, no, I have to actually get in the mood like everybody else. I don't have I'm not 30 anymore, 40, where I have eggs that are waiting to be fertilized. I'm in a different stage of my life. So, what was the question?
Now, how did you get to not having to use marijuana anymore and reach orgasm on your own?
Okay, so I believe that this is another theory that is supported by research, and Dr. Nan, I look forward to you sharing about this. It's called the neuroplasticity theory, that the brain learns new pathways to orgasm.
I love that.
The brain, so it was really, while I thought all those years it was about some therapist is going to give me the right recipe to fix this orgasm problem, it was my brain. The changing the chemistry in my brain was the answer. So and being knowing how to access that space without, am I going to orgasm? Am I not going to orgasm? As one woman had described it to me as the hope frustration loop. She contacted me after Connecticut got approved. The day after I was in the news in CBS News in Connecticut, she wrote to me, this woman, and said, help. Do you have a helpline? I'm 76 years old. I've been married for 55 years and I haven't orgasmed for more than 30 years. And so it's these types of situations that these women are out there suffering, that there is no outlet for them to actually. So I've been in contact with her now since last June. And she's trying cannabis and going through some of the same, I'm like, call Dr. Tischler. He can give you he's one of the few doctors in the country who specializes in cannabis medicine for sexual dysfunctions, for male and female.
How can people find Dr. Tischler if they want to set up? He does consults. He
does consults. He is at inhalemd.com. So if they go to, I just had a conference call with him yesterday. Doc at inhalemd.com. I know he's in Massachusetts.
So when we share this on YouTube, I can put some resources into that so people can do. Yeah, just to comment on that, how does the brain body learn to have an orgasm, and that you don't need the marijuana anymore? It makes perfect sense from the neuroscience perspective. So I call it laying down the pleasure pathway. So the connections between the genitals and the sensory processing and reward circuitry that I studied in my lab, they get strengthened with practice. It's a kind of learning. So we have a saying in neuroscience, it's called Hebb's Law. the neurons or the cells, the brain and spinal cord cells that fire together, wire together. So basically you're strengthening that pathway so that it becomes available. So, practice.
Yep.
It's kind of learning. And for women, it's not, finding their orgasms or having their orgasms find them, which I like to say, so that we're not chasing the orgasm, we're in the sensation, isn't always so accessible as it is for men. Whether there's a cultural aspect that men are supposed to spank the monkeys and, do their masturbation and find their orgasms, their penises are outies. So you can see them and they're there. Like there's probably socially sanctioned a lot more for men to and boys to practice masturbation. So for a lot of women, primary anorgasmia is when you've never had an orgasm. And for the vast majority of those women, even if they've had a history of sexual abuse, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have a specialist, Dr. Holly Richmond, who wrote Reclaiming Pleasure, who did her dissertation work. That's February 7th, about, how women can learn to have pleasure after sexual abuse. That, the primary anorgasmia is often that women just have not had permission to explore and experiment with their body. And if you're anxious to begin with and you keep trying to find the orgasm, is it coming? Is it coming? Am I coming? Yeah, it's really about surrendering to sensation.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur, but as a gynecologist first, and then with more training as a sex counselor, I see women who have primary orgasmia a lot. And I've seen a couple of things. One, I've seen women who have no idea even where their clitoris is and what their anatomy is, haven't really even ever looked at it, which is sad in today's world. But the other thing that I have found, especially with some of the younger women, and so I'm almost 50, but the women like not closer to that perimenopausal age who are struggling, like the 20s and 30s, yes, a lot of them are anxious, but two, a lot of them start building the sensation and then they back away. And I'm not a therapist, so I don't spend like all of this time kind of going into the back stuff, but like it is a challenging thing to get people to be able to like let go and keep trying. There's also a fine line. I'm in New York, so cannabis is legal. So it is just, it's one of those things where we try and we see what we can do, but like I feel like the brain is so powerful in preventing some of these women from like getting out of their own way. You guys have any thoughts about that? Because I try. I use some of Nan's exercises with some of them too, to build those connections. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really what we talk about every week, because it does lead to sex and orgasms. Because when we don't feel safe in our bodies, right? When we don't feel that our environments are safe, like Nan was saying earlier, right? We cannot lose control, because we feel like if we do, right, what's going to happen, right? I need to stay in control to, put fires out and, right? So we need to feel safe first. And Dr. Lori Broader actually has a lot of research on mindfulness as well. Yeah. And it all boils down to the same things. What does mindfulness do? What does marijuana do? They get us into our bodies and feeling the sensations and getting into pleasure. But for a lot of us, we're not even aware of it. Pleasure has become really difficult, especially for women. And, I'm at an age now where my friends are having children and marital problems and all of that. It gets in the way. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like what Nan was saying, that you have to learn, like you have to build your pleasure muscles, but it's almost like we're only learning to activate our pain muscles, right? And it removes us, it disconnects us.
I think we're second-class citizens any way you cut it. I think we always have been second-class citizens in this country, and it's being reinforced now with all of what's going on politically. So even if we're not at the top of the mind aware of not feeling safe, I think it's affecting women. And I think, You know, one of the most important things that we talked about was with Dr. Candace Nicole Hargens about how important it is. The pleasure, she says that being able to have pleasure in our relationships and equity is the most powerful political action we can take. By getting happy in our bodies and in our relationships, we become much more effective people. I totally agree that now, more than ever, being able to elicit our own experience of feeling safe and relaxed and you know, surrendering into pleasure. I want to make a point. There are women who can have a lot of pleasure without orgasms, and men too. And there are people who have orgasms and it's not all that good.
Too.
That's
So
true too.
again, we need to focus on, like we do, like orgasms are great, but I showed in my research that even during the stimulation phases of before people got to orgasm, there was a lot of stuff going on in the pleasure parts of the brain and the brain getting activated. So it's like, you know, look, is it frustrating not to have an orgasm when you want one? There are people who really spend their lives struggling with that. I'm not trying to dissociate or not dissociate, or dismiss that. But it's like if you again get back into, as Beverly Whipple, my mentor and incredible sex scientist, she said that, you know, be in your sensations and stop trying to achieve orgasm
Yeah.
as a goal. Experience orgasm, experience pleasures.
And I think this is a metaphor in general, to slow down and stop trying to achieve all the time. In general, talking about your 20-year-old patients also, Maureen, right? Like, I'm sure they have a lot of pressure, college, career. It's almost like if I slow down, if I surrender, right, I'm going to be behind or something. We don't allow ourselves to slow down. And also in sex, it's the same. And actually, I just heard something really interesting, that children really perceive their moms. It's not just the stress, but if a mom is constantly in a hurry, constantly rushing, it actually negatively impacts our children. So, and as a mom, I know exactly what I mean. We constantly feel like I always feel like there's like somebody chasing me, and I'm just like, I need to do this, I need to do that. And now that I'm aware of it, you know, I'm trying to really, when I'm with my child, to slow down and be in the present moment. And that is experiencing pleasure in and of itself, allowing myself to just be fully present and enjoy this moment with my beautiful child.
Beautifully said, Limor. You know, one thing I write about in my book, in Why Good Sex Matters, is how we're living in an artificial sense of crisis all the time. And people who are tuned into their social, not just social media, but their smartphones and their notification, and the way the media portrays it, it's all doom and gloom. And guess what? We don't have to do that. We don't have to buy into this flight or fight life. We don't have to dissociate, you know. And I just picked up a book yesterday and started reading it, The Surprising Science of Human Human Goodness. That may not be the title. I'll have to go back to it. But you know, most people are really good. We are trained by the media to think everything's awful. Nobody trusts anybody. And if you take polls, that's in fact the case. But if you research people, people are good natured, they're trusting, they're loving. So we need to stop buying into this whole cynicism and getting manipulated by the media that everything is life and death. So there, I'll make room for you guys to talk about what is compelling to you in the moment.
I would love to share a comment back about, I think it was Dr. Maureen, or was it
Mo?
Limor, about
Limor?
letting go.
Oh,
Letting go.
Oh yeah, they can't let go.
Yeah, because the letting go is from the prefrontal cortex. Meaning, when the brain, and I interviewed one woman, and I can share from my own experience in this spot as well. And she would tell me, like, when she was practicing, like what we called a pleasure practice, developed with intention, using cannabis with intention, setting time aside to create a pleasure practice, And she said when her brain would tell her, oh, you know what, I think you're getting ready to come. I think you're going to climax soon. That she would tell that part of her brain to please be quiet. That's not really, thank you, but that's not really helpful. And, so a lot of this is about unlearning, developing a pleasure practice. I mean, really committing. I mean, that's what I did. Like I committed to, I actually had 3 women that for 4 of us for a year and a half, we met every week after I said, hey, I'm starting this pleasure practice. I'm going to figure out how to, because I had one orgasm with this guy that when I was telling you about this story in the beginning. When we lean into the pleasure, and I mean feeling the pleasure, the moment was he had, I'm going to be graphic for just 1 second, just to
Go
say for
for it.
you.
Full
He had his
permission.
fingers inside. He knew, I didn't know what he was doing, but he was touching the spot inside of me, the G spot. And I noticed that I had leaned back to relax. And then the good girl in me sat me right back up. And he said, I got you. I got you, baby. You can relax. And when I relaxed, I ejaculated for the very first time in my life. And I burst into tears. He's like, you're coming, baby.
Yeah.
You're coming.
I'm getting chills.
It gives me the chills too, because it was the most liberating moment in my life.
Yeah.
And we were like, I wonder if that's going to happen again, and I mean, not only did it happen again, it would happen with or without cannabis. It became irrelevant. So I became a testimony to what I read in the research, even from she wasn't a doctor. It was Barbara Lewis, who wrote the book The Sexual Power of Marijuana in 1970. I have this book, and she talked about women who would tell her, they would use cannabis to help them orgasm, and then they didn't need it anymore. So if we look at it as cannabis assisted orgasm, like learning how to surrender, because I think surrender, because I used to think, the therapist would say, you need to fantasize. And I'd be like, okay, let me put a fantasy in my mind. And, but the little voice would be like, oh, you're going to come. And it's like, oh, well, let me be prepared for that. No, we can't be prepared for that. We have to surrender. So it's a really, I'm going to say a tricky game to teach the mind that, listen, I don't need your help. I don't need your help. Please, I'm going to invite you to be quiet so that I can just feel what's going on here.
Yeah.
And then the orgasm will happen.
And paradoxically, as someone who's had a lot of mind with panic attacks and all of that over the course of my life, what really started to work for me was when I gave my mind permission to be whatever it was doing. And then I would just put the attention back on the sensations.
Yes.
Now, I can say the only time in my life I had trouble having orgasms, if anybody is curious about it, is when I was actually doing my brain fMRI studies of orgasm. And what I would do is go, what's going on in my brain? What's going on in my brain? What's going on in my brain? Wasn't helpful. But I will say that, what marijuana does do for me personally is it actually enhances my ability to tune into the pleasure channel. And then I feel like having sex because, I'm 67 years old. I've got aches and pains. I'm carrying around my 20-something pound grandchild all the time. My back hurts. And then, the knees hurts from running all those years. And what happens is a little tiny bit, I don't need a lot, because it's activating. And I try and stick with indica strains rather than the sativa strains, if anybody knows anything about it. Although Dr. Tischler says it's, it really is, it depends on the person. But a little bit then kind of gets me into, ooh, I'm feeling good in my body. And that means I go walking. Now, if you think about what people do when they drink, do you notice people who have a couple of drinks and then they feel like exercising? Not usually. And what happens is initially alcohol is a stimulant, which might make you feel like having sex, but then it becomes a depressant.
Absolutely.
And also it impacts your performance, especially as a man.
So, dick is what they called it back in the day.
And actually, is it true? I saw a study, I don't know if it was out of Stanford, that actually said it helps men get harder. Marijuana, not alcohol. So it's the
I wouldn't
opposite
be
of drinking.
surprised. It's unfortunate that there isn't more research being done. Now, Suzanne, you told us, or you told me about an actual controlled study that was just done about cancer survivors. Will you tell us about this? Because that's actually the highest form of research when they
Yes.
do randomized controlled studies.
That was it was published in December. It was done in the UK, and it was with regards to cannabis women that were gynecological cancer patients who had acquired FOD. Meaning they didn't used to have FOD, female orgasmic difficulty, or desire issues or arousal issues. It came as a result of the cancer. And
the treatment, I'm sure, right?
The treatment,
Surgeries, chemo, whatever. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, it could be
radiation.
the actual surgery itself, where in some cases the cervix, like the woman who petitioned Oregon, for example, is a cervical cancer survivor who used cannabis and helped her get her orgasm back and learn new ways to orgasm. So, and she's gone on public record about that, even though Oregon denied FOD, which is a separate story. But anyway, I lost my train.
The random controlled trial.
Yes. So they
Randomized.
found that the women who used the cannabis suppositories and mindfulness, they called it mindful compassion, had a statistically significant result versus women who were not using any cannabis suppositories at all, as well as the women who used cannabis suppositories but weren't using them with mindfulness. So
they were tuning into the body channel mostly.
Exactly. It wasn't just using them, it was with intention. And that, I mean, creating intention. And I think that's a really important, because we're using a medicine. I mean, when we look at cannabis from a medical perspective, we're using
about
medicine.
Psychedelics. When they use psychedelics for treatment of mental health conditions or when people are facing death, as you, Michael Collins, who wrote the book on this, How to Change Your Mind, it's always about set and setting. So the mindset that you're in, the setting that you're in, the intention really takes it away from just recreational, like, oh, I'm going to get stoned, and occupy myself. It's like, I'm having an intention to be in my body channel, to find pleasure, and finding pleasure. One of the things for women is that women get trained to be objects. Their bodies are objects for the male. I'm being heterosexual, talking about it, but the male glance. And women don't have the experience often of just being embodied. So the embodiment as a woman where your body is a place of pleasure for you, I think is a big part of that shift. Not for somebody
Well, there's
else.
also a lot of cultural stigma around it. So, but I like this. I like using it as a tool.
Yeah.
And as a tool for women's health, I think, in petitioning these states, we've had 5 states deny the petition to add female orgasmic disorder. Ohio denied it, Mississippi denied it, Maryland denied it, Oregon denied it, as I mentioned, and there was one other denial. I can't think of it at the moment. New Mexico's board has approved it at the board level, and then we had, as I mentioned, 2 states that actually added it to their conditions of their list, which is Illinois and Connecticut. And because I think female orgasmic disorder has been misrepresented, which it doesn't really get proper recognition. I was talking to my brother even yesterday about, he says, well, erectile dysfunction, like it's been normalized. There's commercials for it. There are clinics for it. There are treatments for it, and for women, I've looked and it's like, oh, well, they recommend some psychological therapy. That is not, when we actually have a proven pathway that's been shown now in scientific research.
Yeah, no,
and
it's
it happens
sexist.
to be cannabis.
Yeah,
It's just
if it was male orgasm disorder and it was shown that marijuana would be beneficial, there'd be drive-in marijuana centers for men to be able to get their prescriptions.
They would.
Or if they big pharma could make money off of it, it would be used.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, for 20 years in women's health, like this is, I mean, probably like the peak of like the kind of crap that we won't talk about for women, and we won't authorize or give permission or treat even with good evidence. But like, I mean, this is women's health. This has been my career. Like, nobody gives a crap. Like, they don't give a crap. They don't fund research. They treat us like little men, even though we're completely effing different. There has been no changes in treatment for endometriosis in my entire career. People ignored, you know, hormone therapy for years and hardly did any new research after like a stupid media blowout of, you know, misrepresentation. Like, this is women's health. This is like, this is my everyday battle. But sex especially, it's so polarizing that women could have their own sexual identity, their own sexual pleasure, own their bodies, not be somebody else's receptacle. Like, I think that's, I mean, especially in this day and age, that's still a bridge too far for most people, which pisses me off. And so I hate it.
No, you're right. And speaking of endometriosis, I think in the UK, they actually now prescribe marijuana also to treat endometriosis pain.
That's good.
It was passed in Illinois too.
Okay.
It just was passed.
Great.
For pain. It was passed in Illinois for pain.
Super.
Like, yeah, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Well, we just keep climbing, you know, and for me, like, I just took the word stigma. There's two articles that are in the process of being done this week about cannabis and female orgasm. And one of them is looking at how did we even get this approved in Illinois? Like, this one company, Illinois News Joint. I guess you could, those that are listening that want to watch out for that article, it's coming. And Arkansas Times is also preparing an article where that was the other state that denied it, was Arkansas. So because if I'm going to be talking about the stigma, then I'm facilitating the stigma. I don't want to talk about the stigma. I want to talk about the fact that it affects women's health. My study alone found that women who had female orgasmic disorder compared to women who didn't had more mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, took more pharmaceutical medications, and had more sexual abuse histories. And that's just the beginning of the list. So it is a women's health issue and a woman's right to be able to have an orgasm. Just like it's her right to eat dinner, it's her right to go for a walk, it's her right to have an orgasm. And when we become more confident in talking about it, like we're doing today, and the woman who petitioned the state of Illinois, Gabriella Bova, you know, the reporter's like, I want to know what inspired this woman to be the first woman in the United States to agree to petition her state and say on public record, I have difficulty achieving orgasm and cannabis is helping me. So that is when we begin to make a change in consciousness that, because I plan on doing this indefinitely until all the states are countries, just like PTSD. One last thing I want to say is that PTSD got approved in states like Oregon. Oregon approved it in 2013 without one published study. So 90%, and that was moved by veterans, and 90% of the veterans are male. Now, I don't want to insinuate that there is a gender bias. But when 5 states deny it out of the gate, and there's 50 years of research showing that cannabis helps women with female orgasm.
We don't have control over our own bodies in most states in the US. So there's you can say it. There is definitely a sexist, reasoning behind it. There is.
Well, we're challenging that. So, we're challenging it by petitioning the states. And I'm very impressed that, Illinois, there were Chicago, Normal, NORML, Chicago, petitioned for, and it was just coincidental. They petitioned for ovarian cysts, endometriosis, and uterine fibroids. And then our petition, the Female Orgasm Research Institute, the Women's Cannabis Project, petitioned for female orgasmic disorder, and all four got approved at the same time. And I think because it wasn't just female orgasmic disorder, excuse me, in the title by itself, it was 4 women's conditions. It made AOL News, it made MSN, it made CBS Chicago, NBC Chicago, all the radio stations in Chicago. It made world news. It made, I wrote to Australia who published it. and the UK published it. So,
We
excuse
need to
me,
keep
we just have to keep
talking.
trying.
We do. Yeah, we need to keep talking about it.
I have a little cold.
So
Sorry.
women's sexual health is women's health.
It is.
That's
So
correct.
when we talked last week, when we talked with Anna Lee about, that she's told me that, people tend to think about sexual stuff as not part of the big wellness umbrella for us, right?
Mhm.
And I do want to talk about a little bit about concerns people might have about addiction or people who are worried about getting dependent on substances. Okay. So, there are many, many people who are recreational marijuana users and never develop any kind of actual dependence on the
Mhm.
substance. Physiologically, marijuana is not addictive in the classical sense that it doesn't create withdrawal if you stop it. There are a number of the parameters I think we really need to think about is mindfulness.
Yeah.
When
Yes, it always comes
people
back to
use things,
mindfulness.
and there are people who cannot use marijuana because they do have a tendency towards, shall we say,
Correct.
compulsive use of food. There are people who compulsively use food. There are people who compulsively use alcohol or other. There are people who are compulsive about sex as a sort of self-medicating phenomenon.
Well, it's to numb something else. And
It's to self-soothe, right?
exactly.
So one of the things to think about it, anytime we talk about anything being too much fun, and particularly for women, they're like, oh, it's going to be addictive. So a lot of people get bought into the model that this is going to
Yes,
develop.
same as vibrators, right?
Same as vibrators. A lot of people think vibrators are addictive or it's going to make it hard to have orgasms with without a vibrator.
Men.
With men, there are a lot of men who have a hard time with women using work. Not everybody, but one of the things to think about is, if you are mindful about how you use anything, the set and the setting, and you don't have to be high as a kite floating around the room, being dissociated or, get so high. Each person needs to experiment. We talked about sex experiments with Anna Lee last week, about people using the Linus vibrator to do sex experiments like using caffeine, you can explore, especially now as I'd like to say something about aging. Now, as women age, as men age, sometimes it's a little harder to get there's a degradation sometimes of signal to noise when it comes to nerves. It doesn't have to be full tilt inhibitory, but if you're finding it harder to be in your pleasure body because things are aching, or you're just kind of like it's the signal to noise, meaning that the signal isn't as loud, a little bit of cannabis might be a way to even reset your pleasure system. So if you're going to get some orgasms or better orgasms with and through or more fun sex, it might be just good for you to experiment with it to see if it works for you. Doesn't mean you have to use it every time. I don't use marijuana every time I have sex. And I don't have sex every time I use marijuana. But I do like to know that we can give ourselves permission as women to have more pleasure.
Yeah.
And that we don't have to awfulize it or think there's going to be a bad ending if we have too much fun.
And I like that you're saying this because the end goal doesn't need to be an orgasm. It's also what we always talk about. It can be just to feel, desire, to feel like you're still in the game. And also, actually, there is some research that shows that it's also, it helps you get well, like it's a lubricant in a way for women. So, it's worth it. It's worth trying.
And the natural substance has all of these, so many terpenes and these other things that they haven't been able to really isolate. And if you Big Pharma starts manipulating it and getting patents on it, it's not likely to be the natural medicine, like a plant medicine. It's a plant medicine. And
It's a
before
plant
we had
medicine.
drugs, we had plant medicines, believe it or
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Mhm.
So boy, oh boy, what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Suzanne, you're a
Oh
hero.
my
Yes.
gosh. Thank
You
you
are
so much.
Keep
our hero.
fighting.
I've
Really.
petitioned New Jersey,
Yes,
and if
you
there's
did.
anybody who subsequently hears or watches this and they want to get involved, you can write me, write
Perfect.
any of us to this is so important. And I'm telling you that we're doing the work. This is the personal pleasure is the political. So we're not going to let any administration scare us out of our bodies or scare us out of our pleasure. We're not buying into it that we're second-class citizens. We're going to continue the fight. Maureen is a gynecologist.
Yeah.
This is your purview.
Yeah, if you want to write a letter of support, and Michigan is on board now. There's a Michigan Wellness Center. The director for that center is going to be on board to submit Michigan. Pennsylvania, I just got an email back that they're on board with they got the petition, they acknowledged it. Colorado and there's a number of new states, and anyone that's interested can go to womenscp.org for the list of states, and if they want to petition their state or get involved, they can sign up for our newsletter.
And if there's any men listening, you're part of this
Men
with us.
too.
We really,
Absolutely.
really need your support. I just have one of our listeners or viewers said, love the show. Great job.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Michigan is a man who's petitioning.
That's
And
fantastic.
Hawaii is being led by a man. Dr. Douglas Wu, a neurologist in Ohio, just repetitioned the state for Ohio. That meeting is on February 12th.
Good.
So it affects men and women. This is
Happy wife, happy life.
Happy wife, happy life. And it's like something couples can do together, People go off and have cocktails. There's so much evidence that liquor is a whole lot less safe than we thought. People can do a little tiny bit of cannabis together and have a date, have a
Some
pleasure.
novelty.
Yeah.
You know what my husband and I do a lot? We go walking, and we do a little bit of like cannabis walking, and we're like in our bodies and we're moving and we're at nature.
So nice.
It's a beautiful regimen that you
Sounds
can.
lovely.
Yeah, it is a lovely practice.
Yeah. And
my husband gets
like
medical
Suzanne was
marijuana
saying,
for him by his psychiatrist, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Not for female orgasm disorder, but it's a condition for treatment for, mental health things too.
And I love how you both bring it to have like kind of your session together.
Oh, it's so much fun. It's something we do together. I don't drink anymore. I gave up liquor because it just didn't feel good. And, so I call myself California Sober, me and Willie Nelson.
Cute. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been really, really wonderful. And I'm grateful to all of you, and Nan especially, for hosting the show. And
I got
really inviting me.
Thank you so
we need
much,
to
Suzanne.
talk about our passion project.
Our passion project.
And
And
sorry,
we'll have
just
to
something that Suzanne was saying that I just want to go back to is having accountability partners, maybe really create a female group, where you empower each other and, check on each other's pleasure. How
That's critical.
That's the support, social support. And when you know that you're in it with other people, that's a great point, Limor, then you really can feel more like you can get there.
Yes.
Yeah, and Suzanne, your story about you getting there, I'm sure is giving people
I was like, did I say too much?
Fully intended.
No, you were perfect.
Well, it supported the research that they, that there's new ways we can just. I read it in the research, and then when it happened for me, I was like, I sold my company to go back to school to get my PhD. That's how much this impacted that's how much accessing my orgasm and being freed up from the shame and that it changed my entire life. So
it does.
Good for you.
Yeah. Thank you for your work.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for helping everybody else out. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maureen. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm
There you
delighted
are.
with this conversation.
We can have it forever. all of these
Wow, it's just such a, so for everybody watching, if you didn't see this whole thing, I'm going to post it on our We Need to Talk About YouTube channel. And we're going to be making some clips, and we're just piloting. This is like a brand new show. We're just piloting this. If there's anything that you guys want us to talk about, or if there's anybody who's got a burning interest to come on and tell us what they're up to, feel free to just drop us a message. So thank you. I love this whole, this is a power team.
Yeah.
Woo!
Thank you.
So
Very,
have a
very good.
fabulous
all so
weekend.
much.
Lots of pleasure.
Ladies.
Love you guys so much.
Thank you to all the viewers.
Yay.
Thank you to the viewers.
Yay!
Thank you.
Have a great week and
Thank you.
weekend. And see you. Oh, next week we're on with Susan Broughton, who had she had sexual, physical, and emotional trauma in childhood, and she made pleasure as a pathway for her healing.
Wow.
So this is her personal story. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to have, as I mentioned, Dr. Holly Richmond to talk about her work, Reclaiming Pleasure. On the 31st, we have Dr. Scott Shapiro joining us to talk about ADHD and relationships. And my husband's going to join us because he was late diagnosed as ADHD, and it's definitely been something that was a big challenge for him and for us. So keep us in your thoughts and let us know what you want to hear and what we need to talk about, what we all need to talk about. So have a great weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Everybody.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.